Are you a business owner struggling to nail down your brand voice? Have you hired content writers only to discover they couldn't capture your messaging? If that sounds like you, then you need to download my free resource, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps. Once you complete these simple prompts, you will have a solid foundation for producing your business copy, whether you decide to write your own content or outsource it to a professional, like, say, me. As a bonus, you'll be automatically subscribed to my email list, where you can learn more about my writing services, get my hot takes on everything from effective communication to the recent U.S. presidential election, and receive weekly updates about my podcast, Emotional Abuse is Real. Head over to the link in the show notes to grab Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps today. Trigger warning, this podcast episode features discussions of emotional and narcissistic abuse and the recent United States presidential election. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Serene Leeds. I'm a professional writer and storyteller, and I'm so glad you're here. Well, here we are. This is the first podcast episode that I've recorded since the United States presidential election on November 5th. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm still grieving over Kamala Harris's loss. I know in last week's episode I said I would be taking a podcasting break this week, but given the maelstrom of emotions that I've been juggling, I had to record some episodes that directly addressed Donald Trump's win. There are so many of us out there who are terrified of a second Trump administration. And it's not so easy to just move forward with our lives and act like it's business as usual. I'm trying, but it's really, really hard. If you feel the same, I'm here to remind you that you are not alone. So for the next few podcast episodes, I'm going to be chatting with women who, like me, are deeply affected by the election results and still navigating through their sadness. I especially wanted to speak with women who, like me, are narcissistic abuse survivors who are directly triggered by Donald Trump's win. To kick things off on today's episode, I welcome Skye Polk. Skye is a Dallas-Fort Worth-based content creator focusing on raising awareness about chronic illness and mental health. Several years ago, Skye was diagnosed with a blood circulation disorder called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, P-O-T-S. You noticed I said that very, very slowly because those are words I am not super familiar with. Skye has also spent the past 6 years in narcissistic abuse recovery, having grown up with a narcissistic father. She and I initially connected on Threads, bonding over both the disappointing election results and the fact that we're both kidney stone warriors. Skye's mission is to use her voice to help support others dealing with similar experiences to hers. So I am thrilled for you all to hear our conversation. But as always, before we get into the episode, I have a few quick announcements. Please make sure you're following me on Instagram and Threads at Serene Leeds Writes. That's SarenLeedsWrites. And over on Blue Sky at sereneleads.bsky.social. I will leave links in the show notes because I don't want to have to spell all of that out for you. Also, please make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And don't forget to support Emotional Abuse is Real by leaving a 5-star rating and by writing a review over on Apple Podcasts. I'd also like to remind you that Emotional Abuse is Real still has a Buy Me a Coffee page, and donations are always welcome. That's because this podcast is a one-woman operation, and your donations help support the podcast's production costs. If you're interested in sharing your emotional abuse experience on this podcast, please either DM me on Instagram, email me at hello@sereneleadswrites.com, or fill out my quick and simple application form. I've left links to my Instagram, email, the show's application form, the Buy Me a Coffee page, and my free download, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps, in the show notes. Anyway, without further ado, here's my conversation with Skye Polk. Skye, I'm so happy that you're here. Listeners, we actually connected over on Threads and on Instagram, and we've been getting to know each other over the past couple of weeks. We've bonded through mainly the election results, the disappointing, devastating election results. And so we are going to delve into that topic during our conversation. But Skye, to kick things off, if you could please share your narcissistic abuse story.
Absolutely. So I didn't even have the language to put to it until I was about 24. I'm 30 now, just turned 30 this summer. And I had been in trauma therapy for about a year at that point, and had obviously been unpacking a lot about my childhood, and a lot of that mapped back to my father. And through, that healing journey, learned what narcissism is, what it looks like, and most importantly, what it does to the mind and the body to grow up in an environment like that, to spend all of your critical development in a situation that you don't even know to put the term abuse to quite yet. And so it's been a process. I always have to remind myself and others that healing is not linear.
Correct.
When you're raised in an environment to be conditioned towards certain, thought processes and behaviors, it's going to take a lot of unconditioning. And so just being really kind and patient with myself as much as I can throughout that journey. I have now been in trauma therapy for 6 years. I have an amazing therapist here in Dallas who has really given me my life and my power back. And about 2 years ago, I also joined a group therapy setting for trauma therapy. So it's a lot of other people who are working on very similar things. And that has been such a healing space, because I feel like when we are hurt through other people, we also have to heal through other people. We have to learn that there are safe connections out there. And that's what group has really given me back, is learning to really trust others, and most importantly, trust myself.
Wonderful. And it's providing you with community, which you said, as you said, healing through people. I have learned, especially in the past few weeks, how important community has been, because I'm older. I'm like really fed up with a lot of people after just like a lot of my own trauma. So I do have to remind myself of the importance of interacting with people. And I just want to thank you for being so open about your therapy experiences, because I always like to say on this podcast, the purpose of it is to help with healing, but I am not a mental health professional. So I'm only one piece of the puzzle. I'm only one piece of the healing journey, so to speak. And so I always encourage guests, if they're not receiving help or treatment from a mental health professional, to please do so. Just earlier this morning, I had a wonderful guest and she shared her story. But then I asked her, I was like, are you in therapy for this? And she was like, no. And I was like, well, I hope you'll consider that, because we can't solve all of these problems in one podcast interview. And I'm certainly not equipped to do that. So how have you been doing these past couple of weeks ever since the election results were confirmed?
Good question.
Broad, but we start with the broad question and then we go down to the more detailed ones. Yeah.
I mean, I think like a lot of people, both my body and my mind are feeling it. As you know, I currently have kidney stones. I have a chronic illness, so my body and mind are very, very closely intertwined.
Sure.
So having a bit of a reaction, in the physical, but also a lot mentally. I think that not just myself, but a lot of us are getting triggered right now because we
Yes.
are being put in a very familiar environment, whether we are looking at the people who are stepping into power in our country or just, I'm sure you've dealt with this too, interacting with people online and
Yes.
what that's brought up in them. I think a lot of people on both sides actually are triggered in their own ways and maybe not even recognizing that that is what's happening.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of heaviness in the world right now as I, kind of venture out to run errands and things of that nature. I've noticed like everyone is just really on edge right now, very hyper vigilant, very short with each other. I think we're all feeling it in our nervous system a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So for me, one of the things that's been immensely triggering for me, and I've been very open about this, is how much Donald Trump reminds me of my narcissistic abuser. And I can give so many examples of, I always tell the story from even as far back as 2016 when he was doing the debates with Hillary Clinton. Anytime he would interrupt her and say, wrong, wrong, dude, that's what my abuser, my boss at Rolling Stone, would do all the time. So, and just in a general sense, you're watching an adjudicated rapist, a known sexual abuser, basically get away with everything that he has done. I am watching, and it even brings back childhood memories. I am watching a bully not being held accountable, and basically rewarded for treating people like garbage. I mean, that's me. That's me personally. That's how I'm getting triggered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think once you kind of see what narcissistic abuse entails and you start to recognize the signs, you see it everywhere, right?
Oh God, yeah.
Whether for better or worse.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's something that we can all recognize right now. And maybe even feel, I know at least I do feel a little powerless too.
Yeah.
It just sucks to see people who are misusing their power
Mhm.
be rewarded, like you said. It's very
Yeah.
hard.
It's very hard. And so what I'm trying to do is take back what little power I can. And I'm one I'd love to get your take on this because, and I'm seeing it again from both sides, people who voted for Kamala Harris and even people who voted for Donald Trump. Like, there is like this level of outrage and shock when they see who's being nominated for cabinet positions. And my take on that is not that they're not bad. I mean, these are all terrible choices, but at the same time, I'm looking at both of them, at both of these types of people, and I'm going, well, why is this surprising you? If you voted for Kamala Harris, then you knew what we were up against. And if you voted for Donald Trump, well, isn't that what you voted for? Are you maybe having some buyer's remorse? I mean, I don't know, but so I think that one of the best things that we can do when it comes to combating just the blatant narcissism, not just with Donald Trump, but everyone who surrounds him right now, is don't give him the attention. I know here we are on a podcast talking about it, but if we like post a reaction video or a reaction to whether it's Blue Sky or Threads for every single thing that he does, that's what he, and I find that a lot of his cronies around him want. So that's like one of the small things that I'm trying to do. Like, don't give him the attention. Don't inflate the ego.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Your attention is your power.
Yes.
You always think of, a teacher in a classroom. We're not going to reward the bad behavior by spotlighting it, right?
Right.
That's how I kind of think of this too. And yeah, just even trying to ground myself and ground my nervous system over the past few weeks, it's been pretty challenging because people were so reactive in the comments. I know a lot of people came over to Threads to invoke reaction, unfortunately.
That's what they want. They want the fight. They want that fight. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's because they are numbing through their own anger, right? If they don't have to sit there and think about their own problems, their own behaviors, because they were able to numb it with something else, they're going to become essentially addicted to it. And so whenever we are feeding that and giving it validation, whether good or bad, they're going to keep doing it to get that, reaction. And so what I've been kind of grounding to over the past week is I am not going to allow you to work out your trauma on me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's so smart. And people, if you're seeing trolls in your feed, block, 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 because what they want is a reaction. I mean, that's what they thrive on. That's what they live for. Like, I'm here in New York, right? And okay, are we surrounded by MAGA people? No, but they're here. And I have noticed that they are some of the loudest and most obnoxious people that I've ever come across, because they want that attention. They want that trend. They love being that transgressive person who's just needling you in that one way that's really going to make you angry. Now, I'm not saying that we should just roll over and just let everything happen. Absolutely not. But we do need to be strategic in how we're dealing with our emotions and how we're pushing back. So I'd just love to know, what else are you doing? I mean, even just in the form of whether it's self-care, or is there anything that you personally are doing in your own way to push back on what's ahead?
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of them.
Great.
My voice and
Please.
helping others who are maybe going through the same thing feel seen, whether it's through a podcast, Threads, online. Also, really having to monitor my online time, which can be challenging.
Absolutely.
Especially with, something like this. I feel like it's kind of the scenario where we feel like it's a car crash that we, can't look away from. We want to stay informed, but we have to still, I think, find balance, or, we're just going to ultimately harm ourselves. That's actually a very important talk that I had with my therapist early on, because I tend to have kind of a activist heart. And I told her, it's hard for me to look away because not everyone has the option to do so. And she agreed with that and understood that sentiment. But I think she also said, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So if you're not taking care of you, first, you aren't really going to be able to help anyone else. And so really taking a me first approach during this time, and really letting go of the stigma of that not being selfish, I think has been a really big aspect of my self-care. And then, as I mentioned, lots of therapy, of course. Whether one-on-one or community time, I think is very important. It doesn't even have to be a therapy group. I think that can be, any cause or commonality that you have with other people, again, to really surround yourself with people who are safe and uplifting and remind you that we have a lot more in common than we don't. And then, of course, self-care. I love me a good bubble bath and a cup of tea at the end of the night, limiting phone time at nighttime, and really letting my nervous system come back into safety.
Good. I think that those are all excellent forms of self-care that you are doing for yourself, because, like my husband told me yesterday, like, you need to rest so you can be ready for what's coming. So what I wanted to ask was, because you are a content creator, so what are you doing to make sure that you're not like online 24/7? It's part of that's part of your career. Yeah.
It's very hard to turn off. I'm going to be very honest. Every day is a battle, and just remembering that, okay, this doesn't have to be a linear experience. If I do better one day than another with monitoring the online time, that's okay. it doesn't have to be black and white, but also really making sure that I'm connecting with people who fill my cup back up. So whether that's people in a similar community to me as, such as the chronic illness community, or, other people who are just really feeling the effects of what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, just really keeping an eye on my screen time. And before I reply to anybody, kind of doing a self check of, okay, is this a good faith conversation? Because if it's not starting in good faith, then I'm probably reacting out of my own trauma wound, because I have this tendency, as I think a lot of survivors of narcissistic abuse do, where we feel very misunderstood and very not heard, right? And so I know personally, I can become a little reactive if I'm feeling misunderstood or unheard online. And really doing a gut check of, okay, what am I trying to accomplish here? And is it in good faith to begin with?
Hello, my name is Gretel Lemaitre, and I ponder life and loss whilst also reading to you extracts from Bede's work, The Venerable Bede. Sometimes I send the podcast from a garden or a church or a city street or a wood. So I try to include ambient sound, and it's a gentle, clean podcast, only about 10 to 15 minutes, and I'd love it if you could join me on my journey through life with Bede. See you soon.
That is very, very wise. I'm so glad that you're doing that, because everyone I find, especially right now, is always running hot. So they're always just running to respond, and take that extra pause. It absolutely makes a difference. So another thing that I wanted to ask you, because I think that this will help listeners navigate what's ahead, and it will help remind everyone that you don't have to take on everything. One of the pieces of advice that I've been seeing across the board is just pick one or two areas of concern to focus on with regards to the new administration. So for me personally, that's reproductive rights. And for the sake of my daughter, who's neurodivergent, what's going to happen to the Department of Education, and especially what's going to happen with Linda McMahon at the
all you can do is laugh, right?
All I can do is laugh, and it doesn't mean that I'm dismissing it. Because this is very serious. So what are your one or two top concerns?
Oh, yeah. I think that's great advice, because we have to prevent burnout. But yeah, that's the challenge. I would say for me, definitely the chronic illness and disability community. Just saw a bunch of nominations come through for the Department of Health that are very concerning. And,
mildly,
are life and death for a lot of people. And so just really serving that community, making sure that they at least feel seen and heard, I think is a beautiful service to provide. And then I also am very passionate about women's health, reproductive rights as well.
Yeah, especially because you are in Texas. And so what's that been like for you? I mean, I am always very quick to acknowledge my privilege living in New York. I mean, I had my annual OBGYN exam yesterday, and I just couldn't stop thinking about how fortunate I was, where not that my doctor dismissed any of my concerns, but she kind of talked me off the ledge. So how are you doing living, being a woman and living in Texas?
Yeah, it's hard. It's been hard. And that's just the reality of it. Also, like you mentioned, you can never fully get away, nor is it necessarily even healthy to get away from people who have differing viewpoints than you. Definitely that is amplified in Texas. I'm in a suburb out of DFW. So it's a very mixed bag. And, as of election night, we started seeing Trump signs go up in our neighborhood. People feeling very emboldened all of a sudden. And that feeling a little scary because unfortunately, as a woman who's also queer and chronically ill and disabled, our very existence is politicized. And that can be very scary to essentially not know if you can trust your neighbors. But also when we get into the reproductive health of it all, that's been very, very scary. I feel like this has essentially taken away my ability to family plan, which is a grief that I've really had to sit with. I have not made up my mind yet if I want kids or not, but as I'm getting older, have become a little bit more open to at least exploring what that might look like for me and my partner. This is very scary as a chronically ill woman, especially if I get pregnant later in life. I'm going to be high risk, and knowing that I may not be able to get the medical care that I need is very scary. And I've had a lot of talks with friends, family, my partner about if we're even going to stay in Texas. And that's a very sad and tough reality to face, to have to uproot your life just to make sure you have access to safety, essentially.
Absolutely. And I can't begin to imagine what that must be like for you. And that doesn't mean that I'm sitting here going like, oh yeah, we're safe. I absolutely feel the same way because I've learned to expect the unexpected. And I really appreciate your honesty and your transparency about those concerns because I mean, I joke about it, but it is true. I've never been more grateful to be perimenopausal. I mean, so in that respect, I can focus all of those kinds of worries on my daughter and working to ensure that she has as much safety and opportunities as she gets older. And it's terrifying. I mean, everyone says the same thing. You know, we have fewer reproductive rights than our mothers and even our grandmothers did. I mean, it is absolutely frightening. So I really appreciate your opening up to me about that. I should have asked you this at the beginning. And, so what is your chronic illness?
Yeah, so I am officially diagnosed with POTS and hypermobility, HEDS, and also suspect MCAS and maybe something autoimmune going on. That's actually a great question because of course, this is going to affect a lot of people's health and well-being. And I actually just 2 days ago enrolled in healthcare for the first time in a long time on the Affordable Care website. And not knowing if that is something that's going to stick is also very scary and frustrating.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to remind listeners that the Affordable Care Act is the same thing as Obamacare.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, a lot of people do not realize, which is
part of the bigger problem. Yeah. What does having POTS entail?
Yeah, good question. I feel like this is something that's becoming a little bit more common with long COVID. I was diagnosed prior to COVID back in 2018 by a cardiologist. I had noticed that I was starting to have a lot of symptoms that concerned me. Heart palpitations, my heart rate getting really high up into the 140s, 180 range while at rest. Getting very dizzy, lightheaded, pre-syncope, sometimes occasionally fainting. So that falls under the umbrella of dysautonomia. And which essentially, to put that in simple terms for people, is your nervous system not being able to regulate itself. So we can definitely get into this at one point, but I do believe that there is a big link between my trauma, because I'm also diagnosed with CPTSD from the narcissistic abuse that we've talked about, and my nervous system now not being able to regulate. It took me about 7 years to get diagnosed. Not a lot of people knew what POTS was pre-COVID. There's still a lot of lack of information and resources out there. But Yeah, so it affects my day to day. Some days I'm too winded and my heart rate is too high to even put away laundry.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's very hard. And then I have hypermobility too, which the two tend to kind of correlate together.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes with a lot of skeletal pain, joint pain, and hypermobility is a connective tissue disorder. So it affects my whole body essentially. So it's going to affect everything from my heart rate, like we just mentioned, to different functions of the organs. So it's
Yeah.
really a full body illness, and there is no cure at this point. So it's all about managing, which is why healthcare resources are so vital to people like me.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've heard of POTS, but I really don't know a lot about it. And that's even me as a writer about women's health. So I really appreciate your explaining what your life is like. And of course, people can go check you out on social media, which of course we'll get to. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything else that you wanted to share about what these past few weeks have been like for you, and any sort of, not words of wisdom, but if there's anything that you would like to say to listeners about connection, community, and what we need to do moving forward.
Yeah, it's a tall order, and I think all of us are kind of running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And you know what?
Yeah.
That's okay. I think that's part of it.
Totally. We are not going to have the answers at this moment, but it starts with talking.
Exactly. I think it's all about just meeting yourself and honoring where you're at, and being mindful of really releasing that, not suppressing it, and being authentic with where we are. I think that for me, at least, this has really felt reminiscent of the stages of grief.
Oh God, yeah.
I lost my brother back in 2016, so I'm very familiar with those stages. Thank you. And yeah, I feel like the first 2 weeks I was in a shock denial phase. I could feel my body going into freeze. Couldn't really do much, didn't have a lot of executive functioning, went into a flare up, got kidney stones.
Sorry.
Coming out of that now, I think I'm now in touch with a lot of anger. I think a lot of it's healthy and grounded anger and just kind of acknowledging reality. And so I think people just need to honor where they're at and also know that even the stages of grief are not going to be linear.
God, no.
Yeah, you might be in anger one day and go all the way back to denial another day. And I think that's very normal and very human. So also, I think just surrounding yourself with any community that you can is very vital. I think sometimes we have to do things that we maybe don't feel inclined to do when we're in a state of, freeze or depression, but are really good for us. And for me, that's been getting out in nature, spending time with my animals, spending time with my friends, and just really protecting my peace, especially with the echo chamber that comes with being online as part of my career.
Absolutely. What animals?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I have a Samoyed. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't. Yeah.
If you picture a big, white, fluffy polar bear dog, that's what he is.
That's
you can find pictures on my Instagram. He's precious. His name is Nico, and he is 8 years old. And then I have a little tabby cat that I adopted. He is 9, and his name is Pip. They both have Disney adjacent names. They're very obscure. Miko is the raccoon from Pocahontas.
Yes, of course. And Pip, no, I know who Pip is. Pip is the is a chipmunk or squirrel from Enchanted. Yes.
I had his name picked out before I even adopted him. I'm like, whenever I have an animal that fits this name, it's happening.
That's wonderful. I love that. Thank you, because I don't want this to all be doom and gloom. I want to share what we all are doing to still find the joy in our lives, because I do think one of the worst things any of us can do is to just be like, miserable all the time. And when we do that, they win. So I think that that's really important. So Skye, how can my listeners connect with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Of course.
So it is my first and last name across all my socials, which is Skye Polk. It's SKYEPOLK.
Okay. You got it. And I will leave links in the show notes. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking with me today. I'm really enjoying getting to know you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to this.
My pleasure.
Space.
Of course. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Skye Polk on Emotional Abuse is Real. If you want to connect with Skye, I've left links to her social media in the show notes. If you would like to be a podcast guest, please email at hello@sereneleadsrights.com. Contact me through Instagram at sereneleadsrights or fill out my guest application form. Please note that this podcast is not a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. Or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, START, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Consider buying me a coffee and go grab my free download, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps. Thanks so much for listening. A very happy Thanksgiving to those who celebrate, and I'll see you next time.